Yeah. So, welcome to session four of this series. I'm delighted to not be doing very much talking today. I'm sure many people on this call probably feel the same way. You're ready to see different perspectives. So, I'll be happy to turn it over to Wendy and Vincent in a moment. But let me start by just kind of sharing the game plan for today. Yeah, so enough talk. Let's move into action. So what this is going to be about is an adjacent path forward. So I'm going to start with just missing these boxes here. I'm going to start with a quick recap of session three, and we sort of closed with three invitations. And I'll provide a little bit of framing and then turn it over to Wendy and Vincent to talk first about the OMNI mapping framework. And I think you'll see a presentation, and then also you get a hands-on walkthrough of the OMNI ecosystem assessment. And then you'll get to see a demo of the Catalyst tool, which is one technology for actually capturing stories, bioregional stories, well, stories of many kinds. And I'll let Wendy and Vincent clarify the nuance behind that statement. We hope to leave time for a rich Q&A like we had in session three. And then I'll come back briefly at the end to talk about next steps and how to get involved. So I wanted to touch on this slide. This came from session three that talked about the nature of bioregional stories. And there was an aspect of this slide that I don't think maybe I emphasized quite enough. So I thought I'd take advantage now to do so. What I was trying to go for here is to clarify the multidimensional nature of bioregional stories that are all rooted in a sense of place, but can have many different dimensions. And this is by no means an exhausting list, but it's a pretty good. It lays out the spectrum of different kinds of stories we want to tell pretty well. And so the point I just wanted to make is just imagine for a minute, what is the text technologies that would enable you to tell, a geologic story, or the technologies that might help you, bring in measurement and reporting and verification systems, or how do you tell the story of your principles, or how do you tell a cultural story, or how do you organize agents and networks of trust, and how do you represent commons in a way that people can interact, right? How can you express governance models or whole new models of how we do the economy or how to do agriculture, right? So what I'm trying to convey here is the breadth of the kinds of information that we're trying to represent in these stories. And if we do it with a bunch of point technologies, a bunch of siloed solutions, then we have a really large integration burden, right, to keep them all coordinated. And in the earlier sessions, I sort of shared how the movie plays out if you have the application providers consolidate functionality into larger and larger chunks, into larger and larger application suites, then they tend to dominate, right? And they create very high switching costs. And you're also, no matter how big it gets, you're constrained by their imagination of what's possible, by their limits of their imagination. So the map, the way it plays into this story is because it has an open-ended architecture, everything in this picture is a holon. So any of this data at some level can be represented. And the other fundamental structure in the map are holon relationships. So anything in here can be related to anything else. And of course, it is in the relationships, in the interrelationships between all these elements of the narrative that the true story emerges, right? And then finally, it can also support the flows of this new economic system that we need. So I just wanted to clarify that, bring in that aspect of the story. Okay, so last time we left with three invitations. We were envisioning that there are many people out there that are feeling the call to do bioregional mapping, whatever that might mean. And maybe a number of the people feel called to do it aren't quite sure. There are a lot of different interpretations of what that can mean. What we are offering as an adjacent path forward that doesn't depend upon the map development or anything else, it's available today, and you'll see it today, is the opportunity to accelerate your bioregional mapping through this OMNI framework. And that helps you figure out what is the story that your bioregion is wanting to tell. What are the important elements, right? Every story includes some elements and leaves some things out. So what are the important elements of your narrative? And so some subset of the projects, we imagine, will be enticed enough by that invitation to join us in this OMNI mapping assessment. Some won't, and that's fine too. We need lots of approaches, lots of different creative approaches. A byproduct of this could be that we grow capacity by building skills and people and processes and integrated technology sets that make it both easier and faster to do mapping and yield higher quality, more useful maps as a result. The final step of the framework is to decide on a tech stack. So after we've evaluated what is the story we want to tell, then and we know some elements of that, when we know the requirements, if you will, then you can evaluate what are the technologies that will help us most effectively tell that story. And there's lots to choose from. So the ability to sort of sort through that and come up with some good answers for you, for your story, is what the final step of that methodology is. The second invitation is that where it fits for people to express, manage, and share their maps in this tool called Catalyst, version 2.5, the Catalyst ecosystem. So that's invitation number 2. And that brings a coherent tech stack where some technologies have been pre-integrated, if you will, to help you tell more of your story. In parallel, Vincent's team and my team will be working very hard to build Catalyst 3.0 on the map. So the first incarnation of the map, the first incarnation of the technology platform that I've been talking about for the last couple of sessions will be realized in Catalyst 3.0. So for those that find the Catalyst 2.5 ecosystem a good fit for the story you're trying to tell, the third invitation will be to migrate then, and we'll smooth the migration path to Catalyst 3.0 and begin to avail yourselves of the expanded potential of the map ecosystem. So those were the 3 invitations that we ended with last time. And one more slide before I turn it over to the stars of today's show. I want to look at bioregional mapping through a somewhat different lens. I'm going to look at it through 3 dimensions. So one is this notion of dynamism, right? Where the map could be a static snapshot in time of some state of a bioregion, all the way up to a spectrum of real-time updates where it's getting refreshed through feeds into natural processes and human-powered processes that are, in fact, bringing the information up to date. And that allows rapid response action. So one dimension to think about the evolution of mapping is moving towards more real-time updates, towards increasing dynamism. The second dimension I'll bring in is that of sovereignty and trust. So how can we trust that the information in the map is believable, is actual, it hasn't been forged, hasn't been co-opted? And to do that, we need to empower sovereign agents, and then we need to have some sort of provenance to connect that together with the data that comes out of that agency. And furthermore, we need to do that at scale. So this is a very complex, it's actually multiple dimensions, but I couldn't draw more than 3. So I'm folding those dimensions together. But just imagine being able to scaffold trust from sovereign agents at global scale. That's kind of what we're moving towards in that dimension. And the third dimension is increasing functional capabilities, which means more kinds of data and more kinds of dances, right? More functionality. So if you think about that slide I had with the, all the different elements of a bioregional story, think about all the different data types that are entailed in that story, right? And if you think about the functionality, it goes beyond just passive consumption of information, but we want to interact with the map and interact with each other in the bioregional ecosystem, right? So the expanding the set of data types and dance types, functionality that a map can support is the third dimension. So there's a rich tradition to draw on. Some have been at this for many years, and I really appreciate Joe and Penny and Brandon and others bringing in that legacy, the amazing legacy of the bioregional mappers that came before us in the work of Planet Drum and Salish Sea and others. Really valuable foundations to build on. For more dynamic, they tend to be fairly static, though, if they've been published in books or in PDFs. So Airtable and Google Sheets and the ability to capture data a little bit more dynamically can offer increases in dynamism and also can scale up, perhaps, and a little bit more functionality. Catalyst 2.5, that's the trajectory that we're suggesting through these invitations, offers more in all three dimensions, more functional capabilities, more integration, more types of data, more open-ended mapping of data, the opportunity to increase trust with permissions models and security models, and the ability to accept more real-time updates. And that's the trajectory towards the map ecosystem that these three invitations are offering as well. So I just wanted to just sort of briefly characterize that. Any questions before I go on? Because I'm just about to turn it over now to Wendy. Yeah, Chris, you have to come off mute.
One question that struck me, Steve, was about compute. I'm curious if the map will have some notion of supporting distributed computation. So I'm thinking about, if we have, in order to maintain control of all our data, let's say it's in this distributed context, it's on, a bunch of different devices, but we want to do some sort of global compute on that.
Yeah.
How are you thinking about that? And how does that fit into the picture? I realized I thought compute was something we probably haven't touched on yet.
Yeah, and I'm probably not going to take the time to give that question the answer that it deserves, Chris. I'm going to suggest maybe we talk about that offline. But the short answer is
Sounds great.
the whole infrastructure is distributed, and therefore we get distributed compute. But that doesn't really get at the heart of what I think you're asking. So, well, let's follow that up offline.
That
Carrie?
sounds
Carrie, looks like you have your hand up, and yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi. Thanks, Steve. This is all wonderful, and I'm just curious if I have if you could help us connect this back to the Earth Regeneration Fund context.
Yeah. Yeah, great question. Well, I think in the framing of the Earth Regeneration Fund, bioregional stories, the ability to be able to tell those stories is an essential element of that, right? And so the more effective way we can tell the story, the more capable the map is, the more different elements of the story, in other words, the more data types, the ability to tell that story at landscape scale, at ecoregion, at watershed, bioregion, multiple bioregions. That sort of holarchy is, I think, another part of that Earth Regeneration Fund story. And as Joe has mentioned, we need a new economic model. Oh, by the way, just this little thing we have to do on the song is a new economic model. And so that entails new kinds of flows, new kinds of currencies, new kinds of thinking about agency and so forth. So those were all elements of it. I'm not sure I'm really
Yeah,
how
Steve,
good I'm connecting it.
could I
Is
jump
that
in just a second on that?
please?
Yeah, I would say that at its core, the idea of the Earth Regeneration Fund is a way of living out a different kind of story that is actually comprised of many stories. There's the story of, this Waldorf school in Barichara and dam removal in Washington State and et cetera. Like there will be lots of stories. But what we need is a structure and a pattern of how the stories become contextualized. Like how do those stories relate to each other? And one of the key things is like there are people who want to fund the kinds of activities that are behind these stories. So they want to know if the stories are real and really happening. So the way of relating to the story is a key part of how this idea of an Earth Regeneration Fund would work. And so as we start to tell more stories or live into more stories, what that means is we have different ways of relating and there's different information that's implied. And so the idea of what Steve is talking about here is partly like how does information get structured and shared and acted upon and brought to the place it's needed when actions are needed so that the decisions can be made effectively. An example might be if more people knew about how advanced our bioregional funding ecosystem is in Barichara, a lot of people doing impact funding right now who actually care about impact would stop the nonsense they're involved in and come and learn from this and imitate it. But because none of those relational patterns have been put in place, they don't even know it exists. And they're certainly not in a healthy trust-based relationship with it. And the same could be said for the complex work that's happening in the greater Takaranto bioregion or what's happening in other places. So this way of building our relationships together that are a scale appropriate to what each story is, because the stories will have different scales. I think all of that is related to the kind of architecture that Steve is talking about here. But as we get into demos and discussions of the mapping, I think this will all become more clear.
Perfect segue. Thanks, Joe. I will say that in some sense, this story is not just the story of bioregional mapping, it's the evolution of mapping in general, which is also the evolution of collective sense making in a larger sense. All right. But without further ado, I would like to introduce Wendy McLean to talk about, well, she'll be introducing the next part of the program where we will get into OMNI mapping and Catalyst. Take it away, Wendy.
Thank you, Steve. Hello, Design School. Thank you for having us here. I just wanted to take a minute to share a little bit about my story and how I ended up in this space today, and also express some appreciation on behalf of the team before handing it to Vincent. My past is actually more in psychology, and I'm a systems thinker, a weaver, and a curator by nature. So the role I often play in any team is to map ecosystems with an ear for highlighting potential synergies and gaps. So I really appreciate what you were just saying, Carrie, and then how you followed up, Steve and Joe, because that is the piece we're missing. I have spent 15 years thinking about this, and everything I have learned, both about human thriving and about life thriving, is that we come together in synergies, and those synergistic patterns weave themselves over and over and over again in fractals. Now, the beautiful thing about this community is that none of this is new to any of you. So I know that that's what we're all seeing and hearing, and we are eager. That's what I hear in all the meetings I go into, eager, beyond eager. I don't think there's a right word for it, like almost painfully eager for the structures that will help us see what's already here. And that's really what I've been listening into. So I really appreciated the past comments made by Tobias and Claire and some other people, really focusing in on our need to be able to get the information to a point where we can be collaborative, synergistic, that we can do sense making at a higher scale. So that's why I'm involved in these projects. I really love bringing tech to a place where it's supporting these processes. So when I met Vincent years ago, it was an instant synergy there, and we've been collaborating ever since. And then Steve also came into the team. So I am here today to do that deep listening behind the scenes while Vincent shares his brilliance. He's really the master architect and creator of the OMNI mapping process and catalyst. And I've been along for the ride as an advisor and influencer and designer in some cases. I have a couple projects on the side that we're also hoping to weave in over time. I want to thank the Buckminster Fuller Institute for being our fiscal sponsor and of the OMNI Mapping project. That the partnership with Buckminster Fuller has really allowed Vincent and I to align our work with our values and be able to offer these tools for free to everyone here and beyond. I also really want to thank Steve Melville and Joe and Penny in the design school for lifting up this project and giving us an opportunity to share it here with all of you today. We're delighted to be here. I'll be paying attention to the chat as we go along. So if people have questions, I'll do my best to answer the questions in chat as Vincent goes through a presentation and the demo. I'll be raising up any sort of questions that sort of need more immediate attention from any confusion that might arise as we're going along. So please just put those kinds of questions in chat and I'll do my best to moderate. And I think that's it. I'll pass to Vincent. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. I'm Vincent. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Wendy and Steve. And I'm going to dive right in because I want to leave as much time as possible for discussion and questions. So I'm going to screen share here. All right. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Beautiful. Okay. So as Steve mentioned, first, we're going to talk a bit about OMNI mapping. And this is a project that is fiscally sponsored by the Buckminster Fuller Institute, and that we hope can be a really useful framework and tool and guide for any bioregional mapping projects that are starting to begin to bring together the people and the processes in order to map out their bioregions and to tell the right stories. So I'll start off by saying that everyone here creates maps, whether they realize it or not. And I think this is a really powerful statement because maps are what I think we really need to help us navigate the complex terrain of the world that, we are trying to transition into a better model. And in order to do so, I think the ability to do that in a coordinated and collaborative way requires that we have some shared understanding of reality and a shared vision and a shared end goal or a destination for where we want to get to. And having better mapping processes can not only improve all of our work, but also allow us to build on top of the incredible efforts that have come before us and allow others to build on top of what we have done. And this is one of the core principles of the OMNI mapping process. Which is a platform for basically helping networks and organizations organize and share their knowledge in a way that can catalyze action, matchmaking, learning. And this tool emerged out of about 5 years of working directly within these and many other communities and events and trying to identify what are the needs and how can we help to organize information in a way that allows people at an event or in a large global network to be able to better navigate the information, the knowledge, and the people there. And in working with these different organizations and helping to create different ecosystem maps, we kept seeing the patterns of people getting stuck at these same spots in the process and falling into the same pitfalls or failing to follow certain design principles in the way that they had designed their maps. And so the OMNI mapping framework really came out of this need to say, okay, what if also each new organization that's engaging in mapping can not only build on top of the data of existing maps, but also the learnings, and they don't have to learn the same things over again the hard way, and they can build on top of the best practices of the past maps. And I'm sure by now everyone here knows maps are not just geographical, but I want to provide a definition for a map that I really like from Carissa Carter, which is a map is any figure that sorts data visually and presents it spatially. Maps are ways of organizing information and figuring out what's important. And there are many different types of maps. Of course, we have geographical and transportation maps. We have maps of knowledge, such as mind maps. Wikipedias are types of maps that have information structured in a way that makes you navigate the connections between different pieces of knowledge. We have social systems maps, which are, instead of the distance in those maps being about geographical space, it's about how strong are the relationships or connections between people or projects. And then we have things like systems dynamics maps, such as causal loop diagrams, which show cause and effect relationships and how different systems interact with one another. And so here are 4 examples of those different types of maps. And typically these maps are built with different tools, and the data that is used to generate these maps is completely siloed. So you have these 4 distinct maps. We have a geographical map of people working on regeneration. We have in the top right a directory of regen ag projects. We have another organization that created a systems diagram of healthy soil, which shows how biochar sequesters CO2. And then we have a network map that shows how people are working on different projects and how projects are funding each other. Each of these maps has their own distinct goals, their own distinct contexts. And the question that I want to propose to this group is, what if we could connect the information across these different maps, maps of different types, maps that are existing at different scales. For example, one that's at a global level versus one that's at a very regional or local level, and also maps that different networks are building. And if we can do this, we can have the best of both worlds. We can have maps that are designed for their local context, but also unlock the synergies and coordination across those different contexts. So here's an example where this regenerative farm creates biochar, which the systems diagram shows can be used to make healthy soil. And if this is a need of a farm, then we have a potential synergy between these projects, even though they're being mapped in different regions or contexts. The other question is, what if we could build on top of existing maps and their data instead of just starting from a blank canvas every time we begin to map out an ecosystem or a bioregion or a network? And so we coined this term to describe, an ideal world where we can create maps, an map, which is a map that is built, which is focused for its local context, but built with global reusability in mind. And so an OMNI map is OMNI-win. It's something that takes Buckminster Fuller's principles to heart and says, how can we do more with less? And this includes less compute, less data, less time, less energy. And all it requires more of is just more people collaborating and working together to build these maps. And so, Steve had shared a slide talking about going from static maps to more dynamic ones. And so that's really the focus of the maps that we're going to be talking about today. So these are maps that are data-driven. And so, if you change the underlying data, it'll change how that information appears in the map that you're creating. And the reason why we're starting here is because the dynamic data is what enables this reusability across contexts. So if you have, a spreadsheet, a Google Sheet, an Airtable, and you can, dynamically generate a geographical map with this, um, then you also can take that same data and use it to generate a pivot table, which is a map that has a totally different purpose, where, in this case, the gaps here show us where there might be projects missing in a certain region. And the gaps in this map show us, where we might have weaknesses in our network and where we might need to reach out to find people who work in education or in health, because there's a lack of this in our specific region. A network map could also be generated from that same data set where, like I was saying previously, it's about the relationships between people or projects or entities in the map. And, something like a directory, if it's intentionally designed, is also a map. This is also something that can help us navigate and explore in a very intentional way. So the problems that, we constantly see, and the reason we think this new term is needed, is because we feel like these problems end up pervading every organization and most mapping efforts, which is why people keep starting from scratch. So to touch on them briefly, firstly, most maps that are created end up, lacking a clear focus or clear outcomes. So this is a problem with their process. And that means that the end result doesn't actually meet those local contextual needs. And so we think like starting with the end and being able to really nail like, okay, what is our goal here before we create a map is one of the most important principles. The second is that many maps are static, siloed, or constantly created from scratch, and we think there are a lot of technical hurdles here, but there's also many social barriers to collaboration which need to be addressed through this process. And the third is the disconnect across scales. So often local maps are not designed from the start to inform more global actions. And people who are working at a global level, like the UN, their maps and their dashboards lack the local coherence and stories and a connection to place that enable them to actually make decisions which align with the local goals and the local contexts. And so we think there is a chance to really bridge that through a more intentional mapping process that takes this into consideration. So this is really what led us to create the OMNI mapping project. OMNI stands for the Overlapping Mapping Network Infrastructure. And I think the last word, infrastructure, is a really key word because we do feel like this is something that is in support of, and it's, we're trying to create structures that can support mapping. But really the people in this room, like you all are the ones who are deciding what are the stories to tell. And the map is only ever going to be a, approximation of the territory. But if we can do this storytelling in a way that is more collaborative and coordinated, we think that we can accelerate the transition to the world that we are designing these maps for in the first place. So I'm going to touch briefly on the four main kind of principles that drive some of our work and how these principles, you will see these in the OMNI mapping process that I will share in a few minutes. So yeah, the first one is setting clear goals. And so this map shown here is of the Climate Ready Tech Hub in South Florida in Miami. There have been a few federal grants to tech hubs to try to incubate and accelerate the transition to a more resilient climate future, especially in South Florida, where flooding is, a huge, huge concern. And so they have spent months, basically doing a collaborative process with public, private, educational partners to really understand what is the goal of this tech hub, and how is this going to, how is the mapping initiative going to directly serve this goal? And part of that is, defining a clear system boundary. So, you can't do everything at once. So this is really about making those difficult decisions of what's in focus and what is out of focus for now. Because when a map is focused and you have a clear goal, if you achieve it, then you can take on more. And we see this is something that is a principle in all of the successful maps, is that they do a really good job at defining these boundaries. And this could be, you know, a bioregional boundary, but also just the scope of the ambition of the project. Third is picking what are the relevant layers. So, you know, when we say a map, like people have completely different, you know, conceptions of what we mean because maps have different, we often use maps for different purposes. So, you know, you could look at the same map and view it by nation states or by bioregions or by something like human population. And understanding when is the right time to show and hide which of these layers on the map and which are the important ones to enable for what you're doing is really important as well. And the fourth is the focus. So, you know, on the right, I'm sure you may have seen a network map or a geographical map that looks like this, where there's way too much and it becomes unintelligible. And then, of course, on the left, when a map is too sparse, then it's you know not something that is engaging enough for people to really understand what is the story you're telling. And so a good story, whether that's a presentation or something, a you know geographical map or a story told through a Kumu network map, needs to have the right amount of detail. So that and sometimes you know you will have different maps for different stakeholders. You know, your complexity scientists might want the three-dimensional data visualization, but you know, a group of funders might want a higher level summary that lets them dive deeper to specific stories and be able to really see the global to local focus. So I just shared the principles, some of the principles, and the second thing I want to share before diving into the framework is this OMNI mapping process. So this is what we see as a process that almost every single map ends up following in a sort of fractal way. And so, you know, I'll use an example of like a conference. So, you know, if you wanted to create for a conference that was, let's say it was a bioregional organizing event, and you wanted to bring people together in a bioregion to share and present what they're doing. If they were doing a mapping process, it would go something like this. One, they would gather inputs. So they'd send a form out for speakers or people who want to present, and they'd send out a form for people who want to attend or to purchase tickets. So they'd gather data. Then that information would be filtered. Certain people might not be able to attend. There might be certain data that is kind of needs to be screened or filtered out. And they would decide, okay, now what's the privacy of this? Then that data would get organized and structured. So maybe they would categorize the talks into main tracks. And you would do all of these prior steps in order to create a visualization, to actually showcase this information in a way someone could see it. And most maps kind of stop there. They create a pretty output that you can look at. The maps that are successful, in my experience, they also think about how do people interact with this. So what can people do when they see that map? Can they, you know, bookmark a session to go to it later? Can they add a note? Can they reach out to someone? Has there been actionable information gathered in the input stage that someone can take action and you know have an email or something to do with this? And hopefully these interactions generate outputs which serve as the inputs not only to this map, but potentially to other maps. And this process can be cyclical and kind of go in a loop. And so, you know, if you don't think about this process in the start of designing your map, and you get all the way to the visualization stage and you realize, oh, we really want to visualize this data on a geographical map, but you never collected location data, well, we're going to have to go back to the drawing board and start from scratch. So this is where this process becomes really, really helpful. So what we are building with OMNI is, you know, first the OMNI framework, which includes taking everything I've just shared and publishing this as open source processes, guides, toolkits that people can use to learn from in order to create better maps. We are also curating global data sets that are being used by most of the organizations or regions that are doing maps. So, instead of you having to do the work of, collecting all of the different sustainable development goal indicators or all of the different ecoregions and bioregions, we can have that as a global shared data set that everyone works collaboratively to keep up to date, and anyone can use that data set in their map as a starting point. So that is one of the ways that information gets shared across maps, is by using these like shared layers. And the third thing, we're building with this infrastructure is templates on different tools. So we've been building templates on Miro, Airtable, Catalyst that assists with the generation of focus and interconnected OMNI maps. And what we're planning on doing in 2025 is bringing together a cohort of pilot partners to go through the OMNI mapping process with. And we want those projects to be aligned so that way we can create, help them create great maps, but also make this interconnected network of local maps where there's a seamless ability to navigate across them and find synergies, like Wendy was saying, across the different maps that are created. With that, we'll also have a sort of learning report on what worked and what didn't in the different tools and processes these maps used. And we'll be able to have global visualizations that show the intersections across these different maps as well. And the first part of the OMNI mapping framework that we have just published on omnimapping.org, and this is also available as a free Miro template, is our ecosystem mapping assessment. And so I'm going to take you through this and share and show you how we've used this assessment for a bioregion and how this directly helped with the creation of an OMNI map in Catalyst. And how going through this process helped us create both a focus map that also enables this interoperability. I know there's a bunch of things in the chat though, so maybe, Wendy, I don't know if there's one or two questions that we can take before I dive into the assessment, and then we can save the rest for the discussion period after I share that.
Yeah, I think it's just a healthy, what I'm getting is a healthy discussion on the side about what maps are and how knowledge is shared and how we think about knowledge and how we think about maps. So I think you can head forward, unless I will just open it to Stephen Morris if you want to. I was just about to finish answering a question that you had, but maybe you want to raise it. He had a good question about the why people come into mapping in the first place.
Yeah, Vincent, in your process, the circular process, what's missing is why are we making this particular map? Like you said, collect inputs. But if I don't have what my target is, I'll collect all kinds of useless inputs. So to me, it's a big missing that it's not in your diagram. I'm sure you do that, but I think somehow, how do you include that in the diagram, or why is it missing from this particular conversation? You don't need a long answer to that. I've just noted that's just something that stood out for me.
Yeah, no, thanks, Stephen. I'm going to be sure when I share the assessment to really focus in on how to make sure that all of the process is in service to whatever those high level goals and objectives are, because that's what the assessment is really trying to get people to think about.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, yeah, thanks again, Stephen. I don't see any other hands, so I'm going to dive into the assessment. Okay, so here is the OMNI mapping assessment. So this is a Miro template. So if anyone wanted to play around with this, you could always just go to the templates on Miro and type in OMNI, and it'll show up right here. You can hit use template and you'll get a blank version of this to play around with. This is a version that is filled out to show you an example of someone who's went through this process. And so there's a few steps. So it goes from left to right. And the main parts of this assessment is one, setting up the scope or the boundary of the ecosystem or the system you want to map. The second is what Stephen mentioned, aligning on the goals, making sure that you really know what you're trying to achieve. And then it's about deciding on what are the different layers and perspectives that you want to create different maps for. So these could be like different stakeholders, different people who are going to use the map, and they might want to see different aspects of it. And then it gets into the map design. So you don't really do the map design until you go through this work, which, we've designed this to be really a collaborative process, which is why we picked Miro as the first tool to do this, because we find that it's one of the easiest tools for 100 people to get on here and be working on this together. So this is something that would be facilitated by someone and a group process of people, making these decisions together. And only after that is done do you actually get into the mapping process planning, where the thing I shared about this mapping process kind of gets into play. So to kind of give a brief overview, so the system that we decided to map is for the Long Island Coastal Regional Hub. So this is Long Island, New York, and its surrounding waterways. I grew up in East Rockaway, which is in the Long Island Back Bays region, and this area during COVID, we had started an organization called Cooperation Long Island, a mutual aid network, which we started mapping out all the organizations in this region to be able to better coordinate to provide mutual aid during the pandemic. And this was actually the first project that kickstarted all the work that led me really to here and to designing Catalyst. And so this is a potential project. This is something that and this presentation has actually sort of catalyzed this as something that I'm going to be presenting to the Cooperation Long Island group as something that we might embark on in a project. But I wanted to create this map with this region because it's close to home for me. And it's something that I think will provide a really good example of the capabilities of the tool. One of the goals we have is actually to decide what is the boundary geographically. Is it the waterway and of the island itself? Is it the actual Atlantic Ocean Long Island Sound watershed, which extends up into the continental upstate New York and Staten Island? Is it based on the two ecoregions that intersect this? Or is it based on something like the South Bay estuaries and the different natural boundaries that have a unique design and a unique role in the sort of ecosystem? So this is something that is actually one of our goals, to design on this scope. And part of the mapping work that we'll do is to engage players in these different regions and kind of see where this gets drawn. So part of this is, deciding on collectively what are the boundaries of the system. So this could be based on location. It could be based on a topic or domain. Like I said, certain regions are going to have a different focus on the types of stories they want to tell. This could be based around food or land or, tourism or production or whatever it is that is important in that region. Time is another dimension. So, you could have maps that really show historically how an area has changed, or it could be a map that's focused on the future, which is what we chose for this region. And also thinking about the different stakeholders and audiences that you want to think about when building a map. The 1C is about deciding what are the types of information or types of stories that you want to include initially in your map. So we decided that we wanted to, have people related to different projects and initiatives in the region. We'd want to have organizations and the resources that they offer. We'd want people to share stories which are related to different species, as well as different places, whether those be cultural sites or areas. and we have defined some, relationships between these types of information, and we've left some things out for now, like, research or articles, things that we thought might be too much in the beginning. We decided to, pick a kind of a loose goal for the amount of information that should be collected in each of these to really understand, like, how big is this map going to be. And this part of the process, it could be something you start with, but you could also actually start with aligning the goals. I think usually the reason why we put this part of the assessment first is because people often aren't using the same language for describing what they want to map. And so being able to say, okay, stories, and define what does a story mean to me, gives a shared language to be able to talk about the goals in a way that is a lot more productive in our experience. So we decided the overarching goal for this map would be to cultivate a shared understanding of the region, to bridge gaps in talent and initiatives with the available resources, and to support impactful projects through collaboration and equitable resource allocation. I'm not going to go into detail, but we identified this overarching goal through what are the primary, like, opportunities and challenges we see, like, telling the story of the bioregion to funders, and create a directory of projects that we can allocate funding towards. There are many questions that you might want to answer through creating a map, like, what are the places and species most important to regenerating the region, is like a really important question on Long Island, especially as there's so much of it that has been developed, and there's so much that can be done to restore certain habitats. There's also challenges that, thinking about these in advance is really helpful, like keeping the information updated or giving people access to the data that they've contributed. And I think this is probably one of the most important parts, is setting the desired objectives, the key results that you can use to measure if you've been successful, and what are those sort of metrics for tracking success and knowing if you've actually reached your goals. So I'll share maybe two of these. So one of them is to create a portfolio of projects that are ready to receive funding to address needs within the region. And, that's a pretty high level objective. And we came up with some specific things that might tell us, okay, this is going well. So one would be have a project directory with 10 projects, each fully filled out with what they need, the leaders of the project, a plan. Two is have a process where the community can vote, comment, ask questions on projects, and help them get ready for funding. And then to have them go through a round of iteration based on that feedback in order to be ready to receive funding. And for this, we have project completion, project readiness, and a sort of aggregated community poll or sentiment of whether or not this project is ready as the sort of metrics. Another one that we decided on was to connect people with solutions, resources, and stories that match their current needs. And so this includes importing objects into the space based on needs and not based on just what people want to do. Having people submit these into the space and stories for why they feel certain things are really important. And we had here create 10 lists of content organized by top needs, like how to facilitate trust in communities. Each map has this section where you can identify which of these shared goals align with your map. And this is a really helpful thing when we start thinking about a portfolio of 10 projects, who are all doing mapping in a certain region. And understanding, okay, if these projects are all looking to foster cross-sector partnerships, then that is an inherent point of potential synergy across the different ecosystems. So, there's what are the goals specifically of your region, and then what are the shared goals that you want to align with. And we even had an objective here related to this, ensuring local projects align with overlapping bioregional regeneration strategies. For example, this region might sit within the forests of the Northeast bioregion, and we'd want to coordinate with them So we might have some objectives around inviting projects to interface with that other, overlapping region. The third part here is really on the layers and perspectives and the roles. So we identified, the mappers, citizens of Long Island, the Cooperation Long Island Network, Mutual Aid Group, regenerative agriculture, producers, funders as some of our stakeholders. And then for each of these types of information that we decided in the first section, we get to define, okay, which one of these roles are we really trying to share this information with? So it's, who could see this information, who can edit it, who can create a new story or a new project? Does this require some sort of approval? If you can think about these privacy and sort of data sovereignty questions beforehand, this is really helpful for actually deciding what tools you want to use. This part here is about, going deeper into understanding what's the specific type of data we want to collect for each of these types of information. So for example, for people, we want to have contact information and their main areas of work. And for projects, we want to have a project plan. And we want people to be able to share their concerns and their questions about projects. And then we have interactions. So, for people, we decided, okay, we want people to be able to suggest connections to each other. We want them to provide feedback on projects. And we want people to be able to share, sightings of a certain species that they found in their area. And then the interoperability is like, what other systems do you want to integrate with? So for this map, we use ChatGPT to generate some data of local projects and Long Island-based species that are endangered. And we put that into Airtable where we organized it, and then we imported it into Catalyst. So this is a way for the more technical team to understand, okay, like we have these existing tools we're using, and we want to make sure that they're integrated, or we want to make sure that this works with Hilo because that's what we use for our community. So this is where, you're drawing essentially the scope for what now the map design needs in order to make a decision around it. And so really this last step here is on picking, what are the different types of maps you want to create as outputs. So are you creating network maps or GIS maps or systems maps or all of the above? And what is the structure of this information? So how are the different types of information related? And all of this leads to creating a tech stack. So this is about, by going through this assessment, it is agnostic of any particular tool. You can decide after going through this assessment to, use pen and paper to create your map. So this assessment is really designed to help understand what the needs are. And then you pick a technology that is in service to the needs of the map that you want to create. And so, part of what, our role and others here who are, experts in mapping can help do is really guide a bioregion that wants to engage in mapping and suggest tools or a combination of tools, a tech stack that will support their needs. And for this specific map, what we decided was we used Miro and ChatGPT to gather the input of the data. We had some messy human stuff back and forth in Telegram chats and phone calls to curate it. We organized the data with Airtable because this is a really great tool that, I can show you our Airtable here, lets us bulk, update, and we tag things. We were able to, add websites, and we use this really to structure the information. Then for visualization, we imported the data into Catalyst, and we decided that we want to have a geographical map, we want to have a Kumu map that shows the connections, and we want to have a few different directories. And we're also using Catalyst to enable certain interactions and measuring of outputs. So this is an example of, an OMNI mapping assessment that has been filled out. I went through this quicker. This is probably, something that could take between, an hour and a half, 2 hours, or, multiple sessions, depending on the ambition of a region. And yeah, what I'd love to do next is I'll share briefly, how this assessment directly ties to the map that we ended up creating in Catalyst that basically mirrors this. And I'll take a quick pause and just see if there's any questions, and maybe Wendy, I'll pass it back to you since you've been monitoring the chat. Is there anything that I should address specifically on the assessment before we kind of move on and show how this creates some tangible output that people can interact with and get value out of?
Just a lot of excitement. There's a tremendous amount of excitement, people wanting access to the Miro as we filled it out. Not just the open template, but also the one that we filled out so they have it as an example. And so if you're ready to put that in chat, Vincent, I know a lot of people appreciate that. I'm a little
I've got
behind.
a question here. I don't know if my hand's showing up.
Thank you, Claire.
Yeah, I'm wondering about how, I know that it takes a lot of work to fill in some of those fields, and absolutely some of that information is fairly static and it's not going to change that much. But I'm thinking about a new group of people. They come in and I love the fact that it's almost like a teaching process of, we've got to have a boundary and some shared goals. And so there's sort of a way of pulling people together, but there's a learning process that groups will go through. And so what you may enter in your fields at the beginning may shift as you start to get more coherent. But once that information is in, there's something about it being written in, actually written down that sort of, I don't know whether it's like sometimes we're a bit lazy and it's like, oh, that does. But you would never have written that same word. So I'm just thinking, okay, a word like regeneration, we used to use the word sustainable. Maybe at the point where sustainable no longer fits with that, you're going to replace it. Sometimes it's more subtle than that. I guess what my question is how much effort does it take to fill those fields in, and how much are they part of a dynamic updating process? Because some information is like, it can stay fairly static. Like it only needs to get updated once every 5 years or once every year or whatever. But some of it it may not have an actual rhythm yet, but it needs to be updated.
Yeah. Thank you, Claire. There's like 3 really great threads that you just posed there. I'll try to touch on them briefly. So first of all, this assessment is pretty exhaustive, and by no means does everything have to be filled out. We're really trying to just put out what are the right questions to ask. And if there's a question that doesn't feel important to that context, then it could be skipped. And so, and a part of what we're going to share next as a sort of next step is this assessment also is really broadly applicable to almost any system, but we are going to be, over the next 6 months, building a version that's specific for bioregional mapping, which might remove some of the questions that might not be as relevant and include some additional questions that might be very important for a bioregionally focused map. And in the last part of what you shared around about like, okay, how does this assessment change over time? To me, one of the most important things is that, in so many of these initiatives, people come in and out, and you don't want all of the knowledge of a bioregion to be in one person's head. And if something happens to that person, then the whole bioregional organizing team is now at a standstill and they can't do anything because they don't know why certain decisions were made. And so we're hoping that this assessment can be an artifact that people can point back to that provides a sort of transparency into the process that people took to arrive at an output. So you're not just creating, a map. You could share this assessment as this is the process that we went through to get to this map. And then people could, instead of giving you criticism on the map, they can give you criticism on the objective or the goal that you said was the reason you created the map. Because often that's the problem. And so if people can say, hey, we're solving the wrong goal here, well, you made that goal explicit, essentially. And then that can open up discussion that's productive. So we're hoping that this tool can be a way to just help, a group of people have a more transparent, kind of neutral way of looking at what were the decisions that were made in a bioregion and how do we update that together as a group. I hope that answers your question, Clara. I'd be happy to, add any additional context.
Yeah, maybe I'll just say one thing is that I think, I mean, I love what you're doing. So and I think there is another bigger question that comes up with any of this is that how do we share information? Like it needs to be like mapping is a tool within a broader process. And so always putting it into context is that it's useful in some places and in other places, actually, this is the stuff that needs to be developed. It's really hard when those other processes don't yet fully exist. And so you can't point to it, but we do need to sort of understand them as like a whole suite of ways. So having that conversation in a larger context, I think, is also useful because there's some things, the map shouldn't even be trying to do. We should be trying to do that in other ways. It's a mapping that's like, yeah.
Yeah, agreed. Steve, as you have your hand up.
Yeah, just real quick, and you touched on it. I just want to clarify that what you walked people through was an example of the ecosystem mapping assessment tool, which is this OMNI mapping framework is applicable to many different kinds of mapping exercises. The intention is to narrow it to create a template version of this, which is specifically focused on bioregional mapping. And to do that, we hope to enlist the aid of all the people that have such deep skill in bioregional mapping in the design school. And so that'll be part of the invitation at the end. But we're seeding this into the field, and there's lots of expertise on this call and in the design school more generally. And so I just wanted to clarify, we're not positioning this as the answer. We're saying here's some nutrition we're offering into the field. And it's that connection with others. How could this be used? How does it connect to what you're doing? How can you contribute to making it better? That's the weaving we're trying to facilitate through this process.
Thanks, Steve. So I think there's no other hands up, and we have about 20 minutes left. So I'm going to jump to the next part, which is sharing briefly about the actual map that was generated from this assessment in Catalyst. Okay, so Catalyst, for anyone who doesn't know, is a knowledge management platform that provides tools to enable coordination and collaboration within and across ecosystems. And so there are many tools that do knowledge management better than Catalyst. But what we really are focusing on is enabling the collection and sharing of data in a way that this data can be shared across maps. And that's been, a huge challenge and something we're really excited that we're making really great headway on. And I'm going to show you a bit of that in the way that I demo the map that we've created with the Long Island coastal bioregion. So this is a space in Catalyst. This space mimics the boundary that I shared in the OMNI mapping assessment. We've set up a few different sections here that kind of mimic the type of information that we're collecting. And so I'm going to just take you through some of what we have curated as part of this map. So we have an about page, which is, where in the future this would serve as a sort of introduction guide. We have a directory of the different species that play a vital role in the Long Island ecosystem. Some of these are keystone species, others are endangered species that are currently, primary focus of interest for many different organizations on the island. You can, click into one species and be able to kind of dive into the details. So, every object in Catalyst has its own page. There's a directory of different places and initiatives. And one of the ways that we've designed this tool is to have different ways of viewing the same information. So if you did want to see these places initiatives on a geographical map with the sort of cards on the right-hand side, this is one way of exploring that information. In addition, one of the things that I've learned in creating these different maps is you need to provide a really actionable way for people to explore this information that isn't just like, okay, cool, this is cool, what do I do? And so we've tried to provide a lot of really cool functionality where you can actually like look at the website, the live website of this, dairy producer out east, while you're exploring the map. And if you want, you can, go to the interaction, say, okay, I want to mark this to do, or I want to, add a reminder to like go and check this out, or maybe I want to share a note with publicly or with other people in this space. So there are many different interactions that you can take, which can get closer to what are those like end goals or the objectives. And I'll share some of how to like design those intentional goals into the system here. So we have a directory of stories. This is a kind of more typical format of like a thread view in terms of like a more of like a social media. And so if we click on one of these, like the Sylvester Manor Educational Farm, so there's a story here about the farm. You can actually, read this in its initial context on their website. So we're just pointing to this information. But then there are interactions that align with the goals we had. So, one of them was to foster community. And so we have a button here where you can click to share gratitude, and each person can add their own kind of comment, sharing gratitude for this specific story here. If people want, then we also have a way to add a related story. So this prompts people to create a new story that's connected. And this is something that, we've kind of designed these buttons that to align with the goals. And relationships is a really important part when you're doing any sort of map, is showing the connections between things. So this story is related to the Sylvester Manor Farm, which you can see where that is here on the geographical map. I'm going to go to the search all and show you some of the different ways to view just all the information. So as Steve was mentioning, Catalyst is, not just one tool, it's an ecosystem of tools. So we have a two-way integration right now with Airtable, Miro, Kumu, and a few other tools. So this is all the same data from this map now shown in a Kumu. So we basically automatically generate this Kumu map. Right now it's split by type, but we can also visualize the relationships between different things. So for example, the story and the organization that I had shared before and how they're connected. And you can create different, perspectives of this map and group it in different ways for different contexts. There's, a directory of resources. There's a list of people. And we had one of the goals to foster connections. So there's a button here where you can hit suggest connection and you can do matchmaking. So this is a role that you might have in an ecoregion to say that, Ryan should connect with people at Balsam Farms, and you can create a suggested edge in the map that then Ryan or the farm can see and respond to. And the last thing I'll share about this map is the projects. So we had one of the goals being to get projects ready to be funded and then have a process of people being able to vote on these. So, let's say you went to Revive Long Island, Blueprint for Growth. Essentially, you can learn about this project here and then have a process where people can, in the hub, can go through and essentially vote or create a governance system of their own around these projects. So, for example, I'm going to go to the second project in the list, Long Island Regeneration and Resilient event, which is, proposing $10,000 and has a plan for this event. And we created a few different fields where, people could answer these questions for each project. What are your main concerns? What are your main questions? What % of the funding pool do you wish to allocate? And then to vote on the proposed funding amount here. And so this is something that you could then, see the different answers that everyone in the community has responded to. So here are, all the answers for this project. Can we cite this event in a different way? How do we measure success for the event? What are the main outcomes? Who's deciding that? So, this is if you design a process, then, you can create essentially a custom survey or poll while people are actually looking at the projects. This is one of the interesting things that we're working on to enable the types of governance that, other tools like Airtable forms make it very difficult to do. So I think I'm going to probably stop there and open up for some discussion. I would love to spend another 30 minutes or an hour kind of going through the sort of decisions and context in creating maps. One of the things that is really important is the sharing of data across maps. So for example, this in the resources directory, we have here this blue wave of ocean action. And this resource actually came from a different space in Catalyst. This came from Seaworthy Collective, which is an ocean-based startup collective that is using Catalyst. They have this curated directory of mentors and resources. And so you can have certain parts of your map be shared across. And the other thing that, I think is important to highlight is the way that the different types of maps could connect. So, this is a different space on Catalyst, which is a employment fund in South Africa that has done a systems map. And what they've done is imported the data from this Miro, the systems map of child well-being, and they've merged it with their network map of the different initiatives. And so you can actually see how specific initiatives, for example, the Small Projects Foundation here, are connected to different leverage points within the systems map, such as dropout rates in school or hearing. And so, these are some examples of how the OMNI mapping both process and the principles of having the connections across maps, and also how this assessment can help generate a map that is aligned with a clearly defined set of goals. And those goals might not be the goals that you would have for a map that you're trying to create. It might be much simpler or more complex. But we're hoping that this assessment is something you can use to both decide on a tech stack or a non-tech stack that aligns with what you're trying to achieve within your bioregion. And then there is an invitation as well to explore and experiment with the tools that we've created in Catalyst, that might align with some of the capabilities that you're looking for in the maps that you're looking to create. Steve, I know you're the timekeeper today and have the agenda, so maybe you can let us know how much time we have for some discussion questions, and then I'll let you wrap it up after that.
Yeah, well, you did a spectacular job of moving through that quite quickly, and I know that was a lot for everybody to take in. So I'm sure there's lots of questions. There's lots of enthusiasm in the chat. I just want like 3 minutes at the end to go through next steps, and it relates to what people have, some of the questions that have come up in the chat about where, this is great, where do I go with it, right? So that's what we'll bring with the next steps. And then, but so I think you have five minutes for Q&A.
Okay, great.
Yeah, it looks like Joe is first in the queue.
Yeah, I just wanted to make an observation about what's possible here, which is the importance of having a facilitated and scaffolded learning space for exploring tools like this, these tools and these processes, as well as others we can bring in. And so this is something that, like, as I was looking at the way that you did the ecosystem mapping assessment, it's like to walk through some examples of that kind of a process for people in different landscapes, but as a learning community, so that it would be a facilitated process so that people could learn and apply it to their own landscapes. Similarly, for the way of constructing some of the buttons and interaction, the way you were showing when you were demonstrating Catalyst, that there's an art to it and there's a playfulness to it. And so I'm just sensing the significance of that, that space of practice and learning together and the facilitation of that as an element of how this can move forward. Because that's also where we can bring in very, not, I wouldn't say different approaches. I would just say approaches that will allow us to build complementarity, could be in the same community of practice in the same learning spaces. And that would allow us to move this forward. Because one of the things that we've been talking a lot with Brandon and Claire and with Brian and Susan in the GTB, Brandon and Claire in Cascadia, is about the need for a robust and deep bioregional mapping guild that honors the half-century history, the multiple decades of indigenous peoples and others who have been doing this work. And so a community of practice doing this that is bringing in some of these specific and very powerful facilitated mapping processes just feels quite potent to me. So I wanted to name that as a horizon that I see us sitting on right now. And that this presentation, just as you can see from the chat, stimulating a lot of interest in exploring and playing.
Yeah, really excited
Oh, wait,
about.
Penny had something she wanted to say, and I forgot.
Oh, please go ahead.
My
And
bad.
then we'll be on after.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I would just add to what Joe said that the potential I'm seeing here is there's a lot of different people starting to work on information commons and different ways of mapping in the bioregional space. And so if we could just how can we play together basically instead, how can we have all these different kinds of or these different ways of mapping bioregions come together in a play space, a space that can integrate together. And then it's not about competing, it's just about synergizing the different mapping efforts, the different information common efforts.
Yeah, I love that. And I know there's people here from both there's people here like Ben Roberts, who uses SumMap and Kumu, and Simon Grant, who's in the Collaborative Tech Alliance. And so we understand a need to both have a collaboration at the level of people who are building the platforms and protocols for mapping. And then part of that guild is also going to be about facilitation of the people who are creating the maps for a bioregion. And there needs to be a coordination across the tools, but then also across the actual maps generated with those tools. So there's 2 or 3 different scales here. And it's exciting that there are many people in this group that exist at both of those that can really help serve as translators. I'll go to Jan or John. Please tell me if I've correct that pronunciation.
You're close enough. Hey, everyone. Vincent, I have the question. When you look at the Long Island map that you made, did you how did all these projects end up on the map? Did they put themselves there, or was it somebody that knew, right, the landscape and was aware of these projects and populated the map?
So in this particular map, this information because it is, my home, these are projects that I'm aware of and that I had put on the map. And then there's actually a lot of really incredible information that I learned from doing this basically research. So I use ChatGPT to actually generate a lot of the websites that I had no idea these organizations even existed. And I did a lot of learning. Let me see. In my dashboard, I saved a few of these to go back to. So there's also a like sort of personal knowledge layer, which is something that Steve shared. So let me open up this one. So yeah, basically, actually, I didn't save it. So yeah, the really what the assessment is trying to capture is how you want that information to be collected. So the part of the process here is like who can create a project or a story or a resource. And this is information that it could be it could be just an admin of the space. Like, for example, in this conference, I was the admin. It could be anyone who's like a verified member, that they have to be logged in and they need to be approved, or it could just be anyone online. Or maybe this information is coming from a different source. Like you want to hook up a Hilo group with projects and import those into a map that you want to then add another layer on top of it. So I think, deciding on what is the right way to collect these stories, but the data sovereignty dimension that Steve mentioned is really important. And one of the things I didn't share with Catalyst is that there's an ability for people to claim a project and then they become the owner of that and are able to update it.
Yeah, I'm laughing because that's exactly what I ran into and I made a very much more simple app as a mapping exercise. And as part of that learning journey, I for myself uncovered that, the projects themselves have way too much to do to be asked to make yet another account in yet another platform to describe their project. And therefore it becomes the responsibility of people like us that I consider the stewards of the stewards, right, that sit in between to put the information where it can be helpful. And that's exactly what I was going after, because I was wondering when you put some gratitude on this one project, whether they actually have an account and whether they get that gratitude or a message, but it's both is possible if I understand you correctly.
Yeah, so for each object and each field, you can decide, is this public, only restricted to people within a membrane, or private to certain roles? And is that for view or edit access, essentially? So very granular, who can edit and see every cell in the table. And that's what the process helps you decide on. I want to hear Brian's question, but Steve, would it be better for you to close and then we can have a little after party afterwards and just answer some of the
Yeah, well, I think people may want to stay on and ask questions, but I do want to respect the time frame for those that have to leave. So yeah, I was going to suggest real quickly I go through the next steps, then come right back to Brian because I really want to hear what Brian has to say.
Beautiful. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, the next steps are actually quite easy.
All right, over to you, Steve.
We've created a bioregional mapping interest form that we invite you to fill out. I'll show you what that looks like in a second. We welcome a diversity of roles in this, so don't think it's just a technical thing. There are a whole range of ways to contribute, so just express your interest. And then we'll be starting up workshops in January. After we get a sense of the interest, we'll figure out how to structure those workshops. We'll work with Joe and Penny to get those announced in the bioregional mapping space in the design school. So for all the folks that expressed a desire, what do I do next? How do I get my hands on this? This is the front door. There are also ways to directly start using the OMNI map framework yourself. And But I would suggest coming through this portal, and then we can, put you in touch with the best resources depending on what your interest is. And the form is real simple. It just looks like this. So just name and contact information, and we're just asking for simple questions. You can type in anything else you want in this box here. But basically, are you interested in starting a bioregional mapping assessment? Are you interested in helping shape the formation of the bioregionally specific mapping template? Maybe you're interested in becoming a facilitator of the process. Maybe you have an idea about some mapping you'd like to do, where you'd like to engage the mapping assessment, even though it's not a bioregional map. And so those are the options you can express there. And with that, I'll turn back over to Brian for his question.
Thanks very much, Steve. I wanted to, first of all, thank you for your series that you've run. Very thought-provoking and coming along at a really good time. And the Catalyst approach is coming along at a good time. As Joe suggested in the chat, I think it would be great next steps to integrate further discussion into the Bioregional Mapping Guild in the design school, because there are emerging bioregions there that are at a good point of development to start using something like Catalyst. Here in the Greater Toronto bioregion in Toronto, Canada, we've been building relationships on the ground and looking at the landscape and building that context, starting with the land. What does the land need? And building that context with the conservation authorities as well in the bioregion. And it's important to build those on the ground relationships and context before you start mapping, from my perspective, because that really helps you inform how to build that map and how it's going to be customized to your bioregion. So I think that that's an important step. Through all of the work that we've done, we've discovered that one of the conservation authorities has been prototyping a GeoAI approach to doing a detailed land cover layer. And we've now taken that kernel of an idea, and all 13 conservation authorities are going to collaborate and build that detailed land cover layer for the entire bioregion, which is 3 million hectares. So it's huge, and using that GeoAI approach. And our work with Dr. Dan Longboat at Trent University, he wants to bring an indigenous layer to the map. So we take two-eyed seeing from the approach from the start. And so all of this background work and context laying has resulted in suddenly something very appropriate, something very timely, something that can be used to both assess where the landscape's been over the last number of years, ever since they started getting geospatial data. How has it changed over time? How to monitor and evaluate, how to prioritize restoration, and how to monitor and evaluate going forward. So that's huge. And also the work on the social side. The Toronto Foundation does a vital signs report, and various social statistics are available across the landscape. So we can have a socio-cultural layer starting with that data, where we've been training on SenseMaker and using SenseMaker for that layer as well to get pulses and to do nudging. So all of this, as I said, has come from a lot of groundwork, a lot of relationship building, so that what we're doing with the mapping of the actual land, the land telling us what it needs, the sociocultural layer, the indigenous layer, can all be brought together in a really great way. And the Catalyst is really interesting because we were looking at adding other layers to that. And so the specific question I have is, can we put our detailed land cover layer in GIS form into Catalyst and then overlay things on top of it using Catalyst?
That's a great question, Brian. I think the short answer is probably, depending on the tools that you'd like to integrate. We have built an integration with ArcGIS, and there are other tools you might be using that would be pretty easy to integrate with. Also, any tool that creates like an embed that like iframe embeds, you can embed that and then allow people to interact with it. So if you reach out to me and let me know the specific tools that you're using for the geographical mapping, I can give you an exact answer, or we can hop on a call and spin up a little prototype. But yeah, we want to either be able to, support exporting data in formats that are standard and common for most tools, and be able to visualize information from most geographical tools. So whatever you're using, if it's something that we don't integrate with, we probably would love to invest resources into making that happen. Because I think you really need to have that to create an information commons. You can't have things like locked into one tool. And what you're doing is probably going to be a more advanced use case with all those different layers than what Catalyst does natively. So it would make a lot of sense to bring what you're doing in and keep it in that tool, but make sure they can talk together.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. That sounds really incredible, by the way, with what you're doing. So I want to hear more. Steven, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I just want to speak to you, Vincent and Steve, and I'm sure this is going on in your minds, but Jan really pointed to my biggest pain point that I think a lot of communities have is these digital silos where every account we have to create and add our information again and again. And I know this gets wrapped up in the whole digital ID scenario, but it would be so great if I had my persona. And this is one of the reasons I'm so biased towards Holochain, because at least they promote the idea that I can create one digital persona and then I just connect that persona and all the relevant information goes into that website and I don't have to re-enter it again. So the more that Catalyst version 3 and MAP allow for that sort of agent, so that a community can build their profile and then their profile is available anywhere and they don't have to rebuild their profile. And because that's probably the first thing that turns, I'm not going to join Hilo because I've already in Mighty Networks, blah, 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 blah. So I just want to reemphasize that going forward, that kind of design is essential in order to accommodate the overwhelm that the technology provides for us these days. And I'm really impressed with what you guys have done. As someone who considers myself a weaver, but not knowing how to connect people, I see this beautiful tool that I could start to participate in and point people to how to connect themselves rather than me trying to do all the connecting myself. So I love it.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I've found that the hardest thing is how do you maximize both the coherence of design, like it's something that's so simple that my mother can use, and have at the same time that interoperability and the sort of like do more with less principle applied to the data being shared just where you need it. And that's what I think like Steve is approaching things from like that as like the ideal. And I think I've been approaching Catalyst from the perspective of the coherent design. And I think when we bring these projects together on Holochain with the map and Catalyst 3.0, it'll hopefully be able to maximize both. And so, really like what we're doing with Catalyst, the data is not self-hosted and decentralized, but we're really trying to get the user experience right of how do you have these different layers coexisting. So, just a like literally 10-second example, like this is a project that is within the Long Island coastal bioregion. but because I'm logged in, I can answer this question. How is this relevant for me? Which is a private field that I just have set up in my account to answer on any project. And so there's a personal layer, there's the collective layer of this space. And then if this project was imported into another space, you wouldn't see these fields of voting on the funding allocation. But the data that, basically about the project itself and the website, that's something that other people can build on top of with their own context. So you're working on like the same base layer, but then at these different layers, you're adding like different, either a collaborative layer or a personal layer on top. And so that's kind of how we're thinking about the user experience of like we're working with the same data, but we're having these different layers on top of it. And therefore, you could imagine a system where you don't have to fill out a new form every single time you speak at an event. It's just a slightly different layer for this event that maybe you tweak your bio a little bit, but it's building on top of the main one you have. Brian, hi, great to see you.
Hi, good to see you, Vincent. I had a quick question. Steve touched upon in his slides that there's a value flow mechanisms that he has envisioned that could help, actually establish the agreements, keep track of the agreements, and allow value to flow between funders and then those people doing regional work and the impact and everything else. Is that part of Catalyst? How mature is that within the Catalyst tool?
So that is like, to me, one of the main goals we have is enabling that, and it's probably the hardest part. Catalyst started from this project called the Wall of Opportunity, which was literally a physical wall that people posted sheets on at a conference, and then they can be digitally cataloged. It was like needs and offers and doing matchmaking. So from how I see it, there's a spectrum of like mapping to matchmaking, where matchmaking is like the end goal. And I think with value flows, like you're connecting and matching people that have some synergistic reciprocal exchange of value. And so that is, we're starting out right now where it's like people who are network weavers are suggesting connections, where the map itself, is providing people an ability to find others that might, be able to provide an exchange. And I think the next stage that we're going to be going into is more around the value flows and the agreements, and like how I think, Steve could probably answer this better in the map. But how these like directories of data can then start to inform and help people exchange things in a more semi-automated way is really interesting. But we're starting more with the kind of human connection component, where it's like a weaver can help suggest connections and exchanges of value. But that is something that we do see being able to be like scaled up once the process is right. And yeah, I would love to hear your perspective on that approach. But that's kind of I would say like the next year and a half is where we'll be focusing on that really strongly.
Okay, thank you very much. Then what you've accomplished is just absolutely amazing. Never imagined that we could be as far along as you are so quickly. So thanks for answering how that flow aspect fits in with everything. And thanks for everything.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate that.
Right. Well, we're about 15 minutes over time, and there's no other hands up. I think what I might like to do is just maybe turn it over to Joe and Penny to see if there's any final remarks you wanted to offer, and then we'll close.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that there's something in the zeitgeist right now where it's very timely that we're having this conversation for two reasons. One is if we were not simultaneously having other conversations, I think what you're proposing and stepping forward would create unhelpful incoherence with some of those other efforts. And at the same time, it's all emerging where we can blend and weave it. And so it's just as an example, something that we're starting to really feel is going to be significant is to work with the elders, the people who have been doing bioregional mapping for decades, and make coherent what they've done and bring that story forward into the present. And that's going to be its own body of work, whether or not there's bioregional mapping going on. Meaning, like, gathering the story of bioregional mapping needs to be done while we're building bioregional mapping guilds and processes. And so if one was getting ahead of the other, there would be an incoherence in that. That would be completely unintentional, but would just happen at a field level. And so on the positive side, what I'm seeing is that we're moving toward this ability to create coherent communities of practice around mapping, knowledge commons, database architecture, and enterprise architecture design, while also living into practice bioregional funding ecosystems, which is that multiple bioregions are now practicing organizing and mobilizing resources and creating deal flow. And while it's still early days for that, it is starting to happen, which means as all of these other processes are emerging, they have the opportunity to be synergistic. And so I feel like as the design school goes quiet for the next 2 weeks, Penny and I are going into the desert, people will be going to the holidays, there's just this lull of quiet. And then we're going to come back in the new year with a lot of coherence about how to focus and move forward. So in that sense, the timing feels very opportune and very good that this is happening right now. And so I just want to invite all of us to, first of all, respond to the information that's been shared today, fill out the interest form, and we'll start moving this forward. And also know that there is a holding of coherence as an intention that many of us are holding different parts of, and that this is arriving into. And I sense that if we can bring this process forward in the design school, it will actually build coherence into many other communities simultaneously. It's not being exclusionary to do that. To say if we're building this process forward in the design school, that doesn't mean that it excludes the other communities. It's that we are holding a deeper sense of integrity here than some of the other spaces are able to, because of the richness of the people who are here. And so I just want to name that as something that's in service to the larger field, and something that'll need to be held delicately and respectfully, and meaning thoughtfully understanding there's a lot going on out in the field right now. And many of us can sense that. So the timing is really good for this to give a lull of a couple of weeks as many things are congealing for each of us as different people doing sense making in the space, that I can sense this moving forward in a really beautiful way. And so that's what I want to offer, is the sense of that intention being held by multiple people simultaneously, and especially for us in the design school, knowing that we have a responsibility to the field for the place that we sit in this. And so I think the emergence of a bioregional mapping guild in the new year, as we're moving toward a learning journey that starts in March, as we've already initiated a process of birthing the Earth Regeneration Fund, which is creating tendrils out of the world in various interesting ways, mostly not yet visible, but starting to emerge. And that there are other communities starting to host their own accelerator, convening, knowledge mapping processes, that we can build a pattern of coherence here that flows across those others. And so I hope that that's able to occur. And just feeling really good that we're able to be here and hold this space. So Vincent and Wendy, thanks so much for coming and sharing what you've been working on. It feels very appropriate for it to be invited into this space, and a very nice, icing on the cake of Steve's series of talks. And I feel very clearly it's connected with Bill Bowie's talk on carrying capacity, on what we've been doing in the Regenerative Finance Lab, of what's been emerging in the last few months in the Bioregional Leaders Guild, and some of the reframing that's starting to occur around larger narratives, that it's very opportune to be practicing this kind of coherence in practice. Practicing it in practice, not practicing it in our heads, not practicing it with diagrams. I'm actually using that double use of words intentionally. Practicing it in practice. So rather than practicing in quotes in practice, practicing quotes, but not really practicing. So I just feel like this is really beautiful. And thank you so much for hosting it and bringing it into the design school.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. And a big thanks to Steve and Wendy for pushing this into the container here, even though it's not ready. To your point, Joe, like, us having to practice, I think we all have ideal perfectionist tendencies in our head, and very grateful that Steve and Wendy have felt so strongly into the urgency and the need of these sort of processes, and provided this invitation and push to really share this with everyone here today. And Steve is doing all of this while working on that Horizon 3 ideal scenario, and also feeling the need that we need to start doing something now. So I think it's been a really beautiful collaboration between all of us. So just wanted to share that and thank everyone for all your time and great questions today. Such an incredible discussion in the chat that I can't wait to look back into.
Yeah, and we will share the chat and the video recording in the design school within a few hours. So this afternoon or by tomorrow morning. And so thank you so much, everyone.
I just want to close by going full circle. What you brought in, Joe, about there's many things happening in the field, and we're not here to compete with one another. I want to return to the memetic shifts I began with from material culture to planetary culture, and in particular, bring in the core memes of planetary culture, which are interconnection, oneness, partnership instead of domination, and reverence instead of exploitation. And it is in that context that I think I'm so delighted to be a part of this community, because it's embodied in this community, and look forward to what we can co-create together next year.
Beautiful way to close. Thank you, Steve. And onward, we'll just keep going. Thank you, everyone.
Sounds good.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.